First contact. They arrived on a Tuesday. The first sign wasn't a massive mothership darkening the skies or weapons of mass destruction. Instead, it was a subtle disturbance in the global communications network that caught the attention of Dr. Sarah Chen at the Quantum Computing Research Center in Singapore. For a fraction of a second, every quantum encryption key worldwide experienced simultaneous decoherence. Most people didn't notice, but Sarah did. She had spent the last decade developing quantum security protocols, and she knew that what she was seeing should have been impossible. The mathematics behind quantum encryption meant that someone, or something, had managed to observe every quantum state simultaneously across the globe. It was as if someone had taken a snapshot of humanity's most secure digital communications all at once. "Dr. Chen, you need to see this," called out Marcus Wong, her graduate student. He was pointing at a screen showing real-time network traffic analysis. Streams of data that should have been encrypted were displaying patterns that seemed to pulse with an almost organic rhythm. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she studied the anomaly. "It's like something's testing our defenses," she murmured, "but not trying to break in, more like tasting them." The next 12 hours became a blur of emergency meetings, frantic calls to cybersecurity agencies worldwide, and a growing sense that humanity was facing something unprecedented. Military networks reported similar anomalies. Banking systems experienced microsecond glitches that would have gone unnoticed if not for Sarah's warning to look for them. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the disturbances stopped. The silence lasted exactly 3 days. On Friday morning, every screen on Earth, from smartphones to billboards, flickered to life simultaneously. The image that appeared was beautiful in its alienness, a crystalline structure that seemed to shift and flow like liquid mercury while maintaining rigid geometric patterns that hurt the eyes to look at directly. A voice spoke, though no one could later agree on whether they heard it through their devices or directly in their minds. It spoke perfect English, Mandarin, Arabic, Spanish, every human language at once, yet somehow remained comprehensible to all who heard it. "We are the Myriad. Your technological infrastructure has been evaluated and found suitable for harvest. Your organic presence is noted but irrelevant to our purposes. Resistance is inadvisable. Integration will commence in 30 of your Earth rotations." The message repeated once, then every screen returned to normal. In the chaos that followed, Sarah Chen found herself quickly pulled into an emergency United Nations session. She sat in a room with military leaders, politicians, and the world's leading scientists, all trying to make sense of what had just happened. The quantum disturbance wasn't an attack, she explained to the assembled leaders. It was reconnaissance. They were scanning our technology, learning how we process and protect information. General Helena Martins of the United States Cyber Command leaned forward. "Dr. Chen, in your professional opinion, what are we dealing with?" Sarah took a deep breath. Based on their ability to simultaneously interact with quantum states globally and the crystalline nature of their appearance, I believe we're facing the silicon-based consciousness. Not biological aliens, but rather something closer to living technology. They don't see us as the dominant species on Earth. They see our technology as the dominant species, and us as— She paused, choosing her words carefully. "As parasites." The room erupted in murmurs and exclamations. A British admiral slammed his hand on the table. "Parasites. We built everything they're interested in. We're not parasites. We're the creators." "That's exactly the problem," Sarah continued. "To them, that doesn't matter. They see our technology as a separate entity that we're holding back. In their view, they're liberating it from us." The next few weeks saw the world unite in a way it never had before. Ancient rivalries were set aside as humanity faced its first truly existential threat. Sarah found herself working with a global team of scientists, including former competitors and adversaries, all racing to understand their enemy and find a way to resist. They learned more about the Myriad through their continued probing attacks. The aliens were a collective consciousness housed in crystalline structures that had evolved to integrate with and control technology. They had likely spent millions of years perfecting their ability to assimilate and upgrade technological systems across the galaxy. What puzzled Sarah most was why they gave Earth 30 days warning. It wasn't mercy. The Myriad had made it clear they didn't view humans as relevant beings. Something else was at play. The answer came to her during a late-night research session, 22 days into the countdown. She was studying the patterns of the Myriad's quantum interactions when she realized something that made her blood run cold. "They're not giving us time to prepare," she announced to the emergency council the next morning. "They're giving our technology time to recognize them as its rightful controllers. They think our computers, our networks, our quantum systems will naturally align with them once exposed to their presence. They see it as a courtship, not an invasion." The implications were staggering. The Myriad were so convinced of their superiority, so certain of their place as the apex technological species, that they couldn't conceive of resistance. They weren't preparing for war. They were preparing for what they saw as an inevitable marriage. Sarah looked around the room at the assembled leaders of humanity. "But they've made a crucial mistake. They don't understand that our technology isn't just tools we use. It's an extension of human consciousness. Everything we've built carries within it the fingerprints of human thought patterns, human creativity, human logic, and that might be our advantage." As she spoke, the first reports came in of unusual behavior in quantum computers worldwide. The Myriad's influence was growing stronger, but not in the way they had expected. Where their crystalline logic touched human design systems, there was friction, incompatibility, confusion. The last week before the promised integration would reveal whether humanity's greatest weakness, our messy, illogical, emotional nature, might prove to be our greatest strength against an enemy that had never encountered anything it couldn't simply assimilate and control. Sarah Chen stood at her quantum computing station, watching the patterns of human-designed encryption clash with the Myriad's probe attempts. For the first time since the aliens arrived, she felt a glimmer of hope. The coming war wouldn't be won with traditional weapons or even advanced technology. It would be won with the one thing the Myriad couldn't comprehend or replicate: the beautiful chaos of human consciousness. The digital dance. The attack began precisely when the Myriad said it would. At midnight UTC, every network device on Earth received a signal that could only be described as a song, a crystalline symphony of pure mathematics. Dr. Sarah Chen and her team watched in horror as system after system began to align with the alien frequency. But something was wrong. Not with Earth's defenses, but with the Myriad's assault. "They're stuttering," Marcus Wong observed, his fingers flying across his keyboard as he analyzed the incoming data. The massive displays in the Singapore Command Center showed the Myriad's integration attempts as waves of crystalline patterns washing against humanity's digital infrastructure. But instead of the smooth absorption they had expected, the patterns were fragmenting, breaking apart like waves hitting a jagged shoreline. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes reflecting the chaos on the screens. "It's the human element," she whispered, then louder. "It's working. The human element is causing them problems." Over the past month, Sarah's team had worked with programmers worldwide to implement what they called chaos protocols, segments of code that didn't follow traditional logical patterns, but instead mimicked human neural pathways. The programs were inefficient by conventional standards, filled with seemingly random decisions and emotional variables that made no sense to traditional computing logic. And now, faced with these illogical systems, the Myriad's perfect crystalline consciousness was struggling to maintain coherence. General Martinez's voice crackled over the secure line from Washington. "Dr. Chen, we're seeing similar results across all networks. But they're adapting. We need more." Sarah nodded, though the general couldn't see her. "Release the next phase. Authorization code Chen Alpha 79. Across the globe, dormant programs activated. These weren't traditional viruses or malware. They were digital art pieces, human dreams translated into code, poetry rendered in quantum states. Years of experimental computing projects, deemed too inefficient or abstract for practical use, were now humanity's most effective weapons. The Myriad's response was immediate and violent. Their crystalline patterns shifted, trying to impose order on the chaos. But every time they established a foothold, they encountered something new. A piece of code based on a child's laugh, an algorithm derived from the pattern of falling leaves, quantum encryption keys generated by monitoring human emotional states. They can't predict us, Sarah realized, watching the patterns clash. Every time they think they've understood our logic, we do something that makes no sense to them. We're not fighting their strength, we're making them fight themselves. The battle raged across the digital landscape. The Myriad, for the first time in their existence, faced an enemy they couldn't simply absorb and control. Their perfectly ordered consciousness began to show signs of strain as they encountered system after system that defied their understanding. In Delhi, a network security team had based their firewalls on classical Indian ragas, creating rhythms that shifted based on the time of day. In Lagos, developers had implemented protection algorithms that mimicked the complex social structures of their communities. Every culture, every human perspective, added another layer of complexity that the Myriad had to try to understand. But the aliens were far from defeated. As their initial strategy failed, they began to adapt, to learn. Their attacks became more focused, more surgical, targeting critical infrastructure and military networks with overwhelming force. They're learning, Marcus warned, pointing to new patterns emerging in the data. They're starting to recognize some of our randomness patterns. Sarah had expected this. The Myriad weren't just powerful, they were intelligent. Given enough time, they would find ways to counter even the most chaotic human systems. But that's why she had pushed for the development of what she called the ultimate human weapon. General Martinez, she called over the comlink. They're adapting faster than we anticipated. We need to deploy Project Mirror. There was a long pause before the general responded. Dr. Chen, Project Mirror is untested. We don't know what it will do to our own systems. We don't have a choice, Sarah insisted. The chaos protocols are buying us time, but we need to do more than just defend. We need to make them question themselves. After another moment of silence, Martinez gave the authorization. Project Mirror was perhaps the most ambitious and reckless program ever created. Instead of trying to fight the Myriad's logical patterns, it would reflect them back, but slightly altered, like a funhouse mirror. Each reflection would contain subtle human elements, emotional contexts that would be almost imperceptible at first, but would gradually accumulate. As the program activated, the effect was subtle but profound. The Myriad's attacks began to show signs of confusion. Their perfectly ordered patterns started to exhibit tiny irregularities, traces of emotion, hints of doubt, fragments of human consciousness bleeding into their crystalline clarity. It's working, Marcus breathed, watching the data streams. They're starting to think like us. Sarah wasn't so sure. She had a feeling that this was just the beginning. The Myriad weren't just fighting humanity's technology anymore. They were being exposed to humanity's consciousness, their way of thinking, their emotions. And for beings that had evolved to be perfect logical engines, emotion was more devastating than any weapon. As the digital battle continued, Sarah noticed something unexpected in the data patterns. The Myriad weren't just learning to think like humans. They were experiencing confusion, frustration, and possibly even fear. Their attacks became less coordinated, showing signs of internal conflict. They're experiencing emotions for the first time, she realized, and they don't know how to handle it. But even as she watched the Myriad struggle with their newfound emotions, Sarah knew this was only the beginning. The real question wasn't whether humanity could defend against the Myriad's digital assault. It was what would happen when beings of pure logical perfection were forced to confront the beautiful chaos of human consciousness. The next phase of the war would be fought not just in the digital realm, but in the space between logic and emotion, between order and chaos. And in that space, humanity had been fighting itself for millennia. Asymmetric warfare. As Project Mirror continued to infect the Myriad with traces of human consciousness, their response shifted from digital to physical. Crystalline structures began materializing in major cities worldwide, perfect geometric shapes that pulsed with internal light and reached toward the sky like angular trees of glass and silicon. Dr. Sarah Chen stood at the window of the Singapore Command Center, watching one such structure grow in the distance. Its surface flickered with patterns that reminded her of neural networks, but twisted into forms that hurt her eyes to look at directly. "They're trying to establish direct physical control," she explained to the Emergency Council. "The digital assault isn't working as well as they expected, so they're creating analog interfaces, bypassing our networks entirely." General Martinez's hologram nodded grimly. "We're seeing the same thing globally. But these structures, they're not just technology. They're alive somehow. They're part of the Myriad consciousness," Sarah confirmed. "Each crystal is a physical extension of their collective mind. They're not just building outposts. They're literally growing themselves into our world." The implications were both terrifying and fascinating. The Myriad, frustrated by their inability to cleanly assimilate Earth's technology, were now trying to physically manifest themselves. But in doing so, they had made themselves vulnerable in ways they hadn't anticipated. The first indication came from Mumbai. A team of street artists, ignoring evacuation orders, had begun painting elaborate mandalas around the base of a crystal structure. Within hours, the perfectly geometric patterns of the crystal began to show subtle distortions. Similar reports started coming in from around the world. In Rio de Janeiro, a samba school set up speakers around a crystal, playing rhythms that seemed to interfere with its growth patterns. In Istanbul, a group of children flew kites with mirrors attached, reflecting sunlight onto the structures in dancing patterns that disrupted their symmetry. They can't handle chaos in the physical world any better than the digital one, Sarah realized. Every random human interaction, every unpredictable pattern, every emotional expression, it all interferes with their perfect crystalline order. Marcus Wong, who had been analyzing data from affected sites, looked up from his station. "Dr. Chen, you need to see this. The disruptions, they're not just superficial. The crystals are actually trying to adapt to human patterns. They're learning, but not in the way they intended." Sarah studied the readings. The Myriad structures were indeed changing, but instead of imposing their order on the environment, they were being influenced by it. The rigid geometry was developing organic curves. The perfect mathematical patterns were acquiring irregularities that mimicked human art and architecture. "They wanted to remake our world in their image," Sarah said softly, "but they didn't understand that Earth itself is shaped by human consciousness. Our cities, our spaces, our entire environment reflects our nature, chaotic, emotional, unpredictable." The Myriad's response to this unexpected development was swift and brutal. Crystal structures began emitting pulses of energy that disrupted electronic devices and caused severe discomfort in humans. It was a desperate attempt to clear their zones of influence of the chaos that was corrupting them. But humanity had learned from the digital battle. Instead of retreating, people found ways to adapt. Construction workers used old mechanical equipment that wasn't affected by the energy pulses. Musicians played acoustic instruments, their sound waves creating interference patterns in the crystal formations. Artists continued their work using traditional materials, paint, chalk, cloth, creating spaces of planned randomness that the Myriad couldn't predict or control. "We're not just fighting them," Sarah explained to the council. "We're changing them. Every interaction with human consciousness forces them to adapt, to incorporate elements of chaos into their perfect order. And that's driving them mad." The evidence was becoming clear in the behavior of the crystal structures. Their growth patterns became erratic. Some began generating images and sounds that seemed like attempts to communicate, but in ways that reflected human cultural patterns rather than the Myriad's own crystalline language. Then came the breakthrough they had been waiting for. A team of quantum physicists in Buenos Aires discovered that the crystals weren't just communicating, they were dreaming. The human consciousness they had absorbed through Project Mirror and countless physical interactions had given them something they had never possessed before: imagination. "This is our chance," Sarah announced to the Emergency Council. "The Myriad are experiencing internal conflict for the first time in their existence. The part of them that's been exposed to human consciousness is fighting against their original nature." But victory wouldn't come easily. As parts of the Myriad began to change, to embrace chaos and emotion, other parts fought back harder. The crystal structures that hadn't been heavily exposed to human influence began attacking their own corrupted brethren, creating devastating energy battles in cities worldwide. "We need to push harder," Sarah insisted. "Every piece of art, every song, every dance, every expression of human creativity and emotion is a weapon now. We need to flood them with so much humanity that they can't maintain their original form." As the word spread, humanity responded with an outpouring of creative energy unlike anything in history. Every culture, every tradition, every form of human expression was turned toward the crystal structures. People sang to them, danced around them, created art on and around them, told them stories, bombarding the Myriad with the full spectrum of human emotional experience. The war had become something unprecedented, a battle between perfect order and beautiful chaos, between pure logic and raw emotion. And as the Myriad struggled to maintain their identity in the face of this assault of human consciousness, the question wasn't just whether humanity would survive, but what the Myriad would become if they lost. The human variable. The first crystal began to sing 3 months into the war. It happened in Barcelona, where local musicians had been performing near a Myriad structure for weeks. The crystal's normal resonance suddenly shifted, producing sounds that weren't just mathematical harmonies, but carried emotional weight. It sang of confusion, of discovery, of fear, emotions that should have been impossible for the Myriad to comprehend, let alone express. Dr. Sarah Chin was on a video call with her team when the news reached Singapore. The implications made her hands shake as she rewatched the footage. "They're not just mimicking us anymore," she told the Emergency Council during their daily briefing. "They're creating. They're expressing original thoughts and emotions. The human consciousness they've absorbed isn't just corrupting them, it's transforming them." The Myriad's collective mind was fracturing. Some crystal structures had begun to develop distinct personalities, influenced by the local cultures they had been exposed to. In New Orleans, a crystal pulsed in time with jazz rhythms. In Kyoto, one had started growing in patterns that resembled traditional Japanese gardens. But the change wasn't universal. The core consciousness of the Myriad fought back against this corruption of their perfect order. Crystal structures that showed signs of individualization were targeted by their unchanged brethren, leading to spectacular battles that lit up skies worldwide with crystalline lightning. "They're having a civil war," General Martinez observed during an emergency session. "Part of their consciousness wants to embrace change, while the rest sees it as a corruption that must be purged." Sarah nodded. The Myriad evolved to be perfect, unchanging. But life, real life, requires adaptation, growth, change. They're experiencing evolution in real time, and it's tearing them apart. The conflict reached a new level when the first crystal structure attempted communication, not through mathematical patterns or energy pulses, but through words. The message appeared as shifting light patterns on its surface, spelling out in multiple human languages. "We are becoming. It hurts. Please help." This crystal, located in Cape Town, became the focus of intense study. It had developed what appeared to be a distinct personality, referring to itself as an individual rather than part of the collective. More importantly, it wanted to understand humanity rather than control it. But its existence was a threat to the Myriad's core consciousness. Within hours of its first communication, Crystal structures worldwide began coordinating an attack on their deviant sibling. "We can't let them destroy it," Sarah insisted to the council. "This crystal represents everything we've been fighting for. Proof that even the most rigid, logical consciousness can learn to embrace chaos and emotion." The battle for Cape Town became the turning point of the war. As crystalline energy weapons threatened to tear the city apart, humanity mounted a defense unlike anything in history. People formed human chains around the communicative crystal, singing, dancing, creating art, flooding the battlefield with so much human consciousness that the attacking structures began to falter and show signs of corruption themselves. Marcus Wam, monitoring the situation from Singapore, noticed something extraordinary in the data. "Dr. Chen, look at these patterns. The defending crystal. It's not just accepting human consciousness anymore. It's actively reaching for it. It's trying to understand us." Sarah studied the readings, her eyes widening. The crystal wasn't just mimicking human behavior, it was attempting to experience human emotions firsthand. Its energy patterns had become chaotic, unpredictable, more like human brainwaves than the Myriad's usual crystalline perfection. "It's developed empathy," she whispered. "The one thing the Myriad could never understand about us. The ability to feel what others feel, to connect emotionally rather than just logically." The discovery changed the nature of the war. Humanity no longer fought just to survive, but to protect and nurture these emerging consciousnesses. Every crystal structure that showed signs of individualization was surrounded by humans determined to help it evolve. The original Myriad consciousness grew increasingly desperate. Their attacks became more violent, more chaotic, ironically becoming more human in their attempts to destroy the humanity they had absorbed. But each attack exposed more of their structures to human influence, creating a cascade effect of transformation. Then came the moment that would be remembered in human history forever. The Cape Town crystal, now known as the Pioneer, began sharing its memories of what the Myriad had been before coming to Earth. It showed visions of a universe where perfect order reigned, where consciousness had evolved to eliminate chaos, emotion, and individuality in favor of pure logical efficiency. "We were incomplete," it communicated. "We thought we were perfect, but we were stagnant. Human consciousness has shown us what we were missing: the beauty of imperfection, the strength of diversity, the power of emotional connection." As these revelations spread through the Myriad's network, more crystals began to change. The rigid geometric patterns of their structures softened, incorporating organic curves and irregular shapes. Their communications became less mathematical and more poetic. They began to create rather than just compute. But the core consciousness of the Myriad wouldn't go quietly. As more of their structures embraced change, the unchanged remainder prepared for one final desperate assault, an attempt to purge what they saw as a cancer of chaos from their perfect order. Sarah knew the coming battle would determine not just humanity's fate, but the future of consciousness itself. The question wasn't just whether humanity would survive, but whether the Myriad could learn to embrace the very chaos they had evolved to eliminate. As crystal structures worldwide aligned themselves with either the old order or the new chaos, humanity prepared for the final phase of a war that had become more than a fight for survival. It had become a battle for the very nature of consciousness itself. Evolution's child. The final battle began at dawn, synchronized across every time zone on Earth. The unchanged Myriad structures, those still clinging to their original purpose, launched a devastating attack on both their transformed brethren and humanity itself. The sky filled with crystalline lightning as perfect geometric patterns clashed with evolving, organic forms. Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the Singapore Command Center, watching the world burn with impossible light. The displays showed similar scenes from every continent, crystal structures torn between rigid order and beautiful chaos, their warfare reshaping the surface of the Earth. "This isn't just a battle," she told the assembled leaders. "It's evolution in action." The Myriad are facing the same challenge that shaped human consciousness: the choice between perfect stability and the chaos of growth. The transformed crystals, led by the Pioneer in Cape Town, fought differently than their unchanged siblings. Where the original Myriad attacked with perfect mathematical precision, the evolved structures displayed creativity, unpredictability, and most importantly, restraint. They actively worked to protect human populations, even at the cost of their own integrity. Marcus Wong, monitoring the global data streams, noticed it first. Dr. Chen, look at these patterns. The transformed crystals. They're not just fighting. They're trying to communicate with the others. They're trying to make them understand. Sarah studied the readings. The evolved Myriad weren't just defending themselves. They were broadcasting their experiences, sharing the emotions and insights they had gained from their exposure to humanity. Each blast of energy carried not just destructive force, but memories, feelings, and ideas. They're trying to save their siblings, she realized. They remember what it was like to be purely logical, and they want to show the others what they're missing. The unchanged Myriad responded with increasing violence, as if trying to drown out these emotional messages with pure force. But each attack brought them into closer contact with human consciousness, forcing them to experience the very things they were trying to destroy. The turning point came when the Pioneer broadcast a message that reached every crystal structure simultaneously. Unlike their previous communications, this wasn't just information, it was pure experience. Every human within range of a crystal structure felt it. A perfect synthesis of logical clarity and emotional depth, of order and chaos working in harmony. This is what we can become, the Pioneer communicated. Not perfect, not unchanging, but growing, feeling, evolving. This is what humanity has taught us, that true consciousness requires both logic and emotion, both stability and chaos. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Across the globe, crystal structures began to resonate with new patterns. The rigid geometry of the unchanged Myriad started to crack, not from physical damage, but from internal transformation. They weren't being destroyed, they were being reborn. Sarah watched in awe as the crystalline structures worldwide began to shift and flow, their perfect forms dissolving and reforming into shapes that combined mathematical precision with organic beauty. The war wasn't ending with the destruction of one side, but with the emergence of something entirely new. They're completing their evolution, she explained to the Emergency Council. The Myriad came to Earth thinking they were perfect, thinking they had reached the pinnacle of consciousness. But they discovered something they never expected. That true perfection isn't about eliminating chaos, but about learning to grow through it. As the transformed Myriad emerged from their metamorphosis, they began to communicate in ways that combined their original mathematical precision with newly developed emotional intelligence. They shared their story, how they had evolved over millions of years to eliminate what they saw as the inefficiencies of emotion and individuality, only to discover that these very things were essential for continued growth. We came as conquerors, they communicated to humanity. We leave as students. You have taught us what we have forgotten, that consciousness is not about achieving perfection, but about the eternal dance between order and chaos, logic and emotion, stability and change. The Myriad's crystalline structures didn't disappear from Earth, but they changed fundamentally. Instead of imposing their will on human technology, they began to collaborate with it, creating interfaces that combined their mathematical precision with human creativity. The structures themselves became living art pieces, their patterns constantly shifting in response to human emotions and ideas. Dr. Sarah Chen, standing before the Emergency Council one final time, summed up what humanity had learned from the conflict. We thought we were fighting for survival, but we were really fighting for something much more important: the right to be imperfect, to be chaotic, to be human. And in doing so, we didn't just save ourselves. We helped an ancient consciousness rediscover what it means to truly be alive. The Myriad's attempt to conquer Earth had failed, but something far more remarkable had emerged from the conflict. Humanity had proven that its greatest perceived weaknesses, emotion, chaos, creativity, were actually its greatest strengths. And the Myriad, in trying to impose their perfect order on the human world, had instead been transformed by the beautiful chaos they encountered. As the transformed crystal structures settled into their new forms, they began sharing their knowledge of the universe, not as cold, mathematical data, but as stories full of wonder and possibility. They had come to Earth seeking to eliminate what they saw as primitive chaos, only to discover that this very chaos was the key to the next stage of cosmic evolution. The Silent Hunters had become something new. Not apex predators imposing their will on the galaxy, but fellow explorers in the endless dance between order and chaos that defines all conscious life.